and not all of them are purely personnel and HR issues. We should probably start by saying how we got into the warehouse, since we've already heard that Noah Katz apparently wants to sue us for defamation, among other things, as if we're the ones who said this.
With a record of 0 purchases and a falling off following, we're going to be redrawing this name.
Or who said this.
Oh, I'm a Dumbo.
Or did this. It was all above board. We contacted the brokers and, by proxy, the landlord, and they were more than happy to accommodate us.
And if you guys can just like make sure you, if it's okay with you, if you guys can just make sure you're either photographing or videoing the inside of the place, just so we can appreciate it.
To take pictures and things like that.
Okay, cool.
This is especially because Artesian shut down within days of moving into and occupying the new space, leaving the landlord and the brokers without a tenant after a lot of customization and months of work and construction went into it. So it's not much of a surprise that they were happy to talk to us about their former or would-be tenant. And we also got information from staff and from company Slack logs, which included information from Noah himself from the Slack logs. So let's talk about what really went wrong. When the former CEO wasn't busy going out of business and leaving landlords without a tenant, he could be found recalling pay from contractors and employees, putting them into debt in their personal PayPal accounts and what seems, to those of us who aren't lawyers, to be fraudulent or potentially illegal. We'll come back to the more serious evidence like this that we've accumulated a little bit later. Artesian was run by an eccentric man with unique tastes. He modified this small form factor case by allegedly purchasing real dinosaur bones and arts and crafts gluing them to the chassis in what was supposed to bring to life this render of a dinosaur bone case from an artist.
So
now,
damn
that's
dumb,
not
dude.
quite as unique as the $300,000 Tyrannosaurus
It's
skull
like, it looks like
used
he
in
got like
marketing
blue
attempts
double-sided
to
tape,
customize builds,
fucking
but
stones on
it's
it.
still pretty unique. Artesian was a company that found more success in
Oh
its
my
core
God, dude.
PC building
Look at that
business
again. That's
than it
exactly
knew what to
that
do
looks
with.
like, bro.
Mostly built on the back of its unfortunate team, and yet instead of focusing on getting PCs out the door, it tirelessly tried to expand into irrelevant categories. The company
Really?
played with selling home goods like cheesecakes, ordered direct to consumer, jigsaw puzzles of PCs, cutting boards, and slippers, painting a picture of a company run by lost leadership, unaware of the unthinkable success it had already inadvertently stumbled into. And the leadership wasn't only lost in bizarre home goods. Its founder and CEO is also obsessed with the idea of internet fame and celebrity. This is something we experienced firsthand and entirely inappropriately when trying to interview him about the downfall of his company in the days before it closed.
I'm an influencer, but I'm also an executive.
And don't just take our word for it. In the company's internal Slack, when employees were begging the CEO to please apologize for dismissing and disrespecting smaller creators, he made statements like these. When confronted by employees that publicly disrespecting free marketing vectors, whom Artesian referred to as
An ambassador.
Katz said to his staff, wait, what? They're my buddies. What the fuck? If they aren't, that's the whole problem. That's the whole problem, guys. Am I not being clear? In the internal server, he continued, stating, quote, I literally built this brand to be their friends. That's the whole point of being live. I want them all to know me. This aligns with other actions Artesian took. Katz's personal assistant, for example, stated in the company's Slack during a fiery debate with the CEO that views and subs were purchased. We later learned from staff that this was during West Coast builds going live, particularly the CEOs or other people close to him. For all of the public issues that we all already know about, like insulting smaller creators who were doing free marketing for Artesian for the chance to maybe win a PC if they're popular enough, there were more issues internally that weren't revealed really until we started digging into them. So the first person, of course, who knew about the company's impending demise was CEO Noah Katz. This is not a surprise. And in the final days of Artesian's life, the CEO set to withdrawing approximately $10,000 from the company's PayPal account. And this is information that we have verified through bankruptcy hearing records that are filed with the court that we were able to obtain. So with the walls closing in around him, the CEO began clawing back money that was paid to contractors and staff in every way possible. A former staff member named Abby is currently in debt
I know Abby.
British pounds on her PayPal account, or about $4,700 US. This is because what was left of Artesian, or Artesian Futures, or whatever it is now, recalled all payments made to her during the tumultuous downfall of the company. PayPal sided with Katz because of the company's size, probably, and presumably because they didn't know that it was going under. And because Abby doesn't know anyone who really works at PayPal, she's kind of screwed. She's in the UK. She's not able to really feasibly sue Katz, who likely has no money left anyway. PayPal would be the only avenue. The PayPal cases show two disputes, one for $2,965 or so US, and one for $2,570 US. We obtained text logs between Abby and Katz, where Katz, shown on the left, is told that with the COO, Nick, having departed, Abby will need to send the invoice to him. This all happened in December. Katz pays the amount in December of 2021, well before the collapse, and the thread revives in May of 2022, after everyone had already been publicly fired. Abby kindly suggests, probably too kindly, that the text thread serves as evidence for the dispute and asks Katz to keep things amicable at the end. He refers Abby to his lawyers. And just for the record, we have emailed the CEO's lawyers for comment, but at this time, at least of filming, we haven't heard back. Now, this isn't the only chargeback. At one time, especially early in the year, Artesian Builds was in desperate need of GPUs in order to complete builds that were partially assembled but could not ship due to the GPU shortage. And this will build into a much bigger issue that we'll get to later on, where the company had upwards of millions of dollars of inventory, which we've verified on the balance sheet, sitting, waiting to ship, and unable to because it was missing a GPU. So the company ties up all this money in all these builds and cannot actually ship them, creating just a massive liabilities sheet. So as a result of this, Artesian started seeking GPUs from employees and from eBay because they needed them to sell the actual builds. There's nothing inherently wrong with buying a GPU from an employee of the company if the company and the employee come to an agreement about it. That's completely fine. The problem is the payment of it. And by the way, there's also mining PCs being sold from AB Mining, but that's a later story. One particular employee paid about $1,120 US for the 3070 Ti and then sold it to his employer, Artesian Builds, which then went on to sell the GPU in a build upgrade for $1,500 at the company. So they did well, they made some money on it. In May of 2022, Katz, or whoever's handling his finances at this point, challenged the transaction on PayPal and claimed to PayPal that the transaction was fraud. That's ironic. PayPal sided in favor of Artesian and Katz, or his money managers, once again, and clawed back the money from the former employee, who is now short both a GPU and $1,120. In another scenario that was similar, Artesian Builds previously purchased a GPU from one of our viewers on eBay, and that viewer sent us all this documentation. This order was placed in January of 2022 for an RTX 3080 Ti priced at $2,250.
Jesus fucking Christ,
the order
bro.
was shipped to Artesian's West Coast warehouse, and it was insured, meaning that there was a signature of receipt. If you look at the receipt, which we have, it was actually purchased by AB Mining, or Artesian Builds Mining, making this potentially even scummier. The dispute was filed on May 25th, meaning it was 4 months after receipt of the GPU. So the GPU is long gone at this point. The reason provided is, quote, buyer did not recognize the transaction, so he filed it as fraud. Upon further investigation and to vet the source, we also obtained official USPS government documentation noting the delivery of the product to Artesian Builds as certified by the US government's postal service. The money mismanagement didn't stop there. Katz handed down a command from legal to halt all refunds to customers, and this was a knee-jerk reaction to the streaming mishap. So as people were canceling orders or backing out because of what happened on live stream, Artesian took a stance of no refunds, or at least as
I remember that.
directed by Noah Katz and whoever legal is. We're not lawyers here, but
bro, the amount of messages that I had with fucking Noah and Artesian Builds in this whole time frame
as for why these potentially
should have told me, like, yeah,
that's best explained
this is gonna
by
suck.
looking at the company's balance sheet that we dug up. At the time of demise, Artesian Builds had
I was
about
like, am I gonna get my
$2.1
PC
million
yet?
in assets, mostly inventory.
Give it some time.
assets. So
Like, they just
you
procrastinate the
probably
fuck out of
builds
it.
that either have already been sold and are pending shipping or a GPU, or will be sold in the future.
There's so many commas.
This was contrasted starkly by the liabilities section of the balance sheet, listed at $4.1 million in the final full operating month. Of that $4.1 million, $853,000 was claimed as a, quote, loan payable to family, and that would actually be Katz's parents here. This later climbed to an alleged $1.2 million, even just as the company went under. And given that Katz's parents are secured creditors, the sudden increase in the loan puts them in line to get repaid during the bankruptcy proceedings. Meanwhile, customers who bought on debit or who didn't file chargebacks will be behind the parents in line, behind potentially former employees, behind institutions and suppliers, basically behind anybody who is filing a lawsuit. And the reason people who filed chargebacks might get some money back is because you are now lumped in with a secured creditor like a bank. If you look at footnote 7 in the balance sheet, you'll see a $250,000 adjustment to the owner's investment.
Dude, I already have all of these documents
alongside another footnote that
and emails.
The loan from insiders, so that'd be the parents. We don't want to get too derailed by this part of the story, but just for some context, Katz's parents were deeply invested in the company, both financially, but they also were involved at some level in management. So they would communicate regularly with other C-suite employees, CMO, COO, people in that sort of position, and with the lower ranking employees in the company. And they were involved in daily operations by sending lengthy messages to and from employees. And just us reading over the messages and the logs, it became clear to us that there was a culture problem within the company of general disrespect between all parties. So this might fall largely on the CEO and the parental advisors. We can't be 100% sure of how the blame is sort of shifted there. But regardless of where that culture originated, ultimately, we did see a lot of mutual disrespect in the messages that were shared with us from the company's Slack server between basically staff on one side and then CEO on the other. And that's just not conducive to ever running a successful company. And for that reason, we think it was probably doomed long before this stream. Now, we could keep going about this generally sort of scummy behavior, in our opinions, and about things like when the CEO in the company's Slack was shocked that anyone would, quote, curse him or Artesian after it had insulted people based on their follower count, or when the crackdown on staff happened after the streaming mishap. But you all get the point. All of this stuff we've been over so far, it's bad. It's pretty damning. But this was all stuff that happened more or less after or towards the end of the collapse of the company. And so we still need to look at what led up to it and caused that collapse, other than the person running it, which at this point, given the behavior, is probably enough. But there's more. And then we get into the power struggle between the East Coast and West Coast branches of Artesian Builds. The East Coast was run largely autonomously. It had the operations team in it, including the COO and other people in operations and warehousing who could largely run the show on their own. The West Coast was run directly by the CEO, who
they started at West Coast. That's San Francisco.
In terms of staff, our understanding is that the Artesian Build split was about 2 to 1 staff on the West Coast to the East Coast, meaning the West Coast had more staff at any given time than the East Coast based on what we've been informed. So there were about 3 to 4 employees building PCs on the East Coast, and with these staff members for building, not counting support, warehousing, logistics, people in the C-suite for operations or marketing or whatever, not counting any of those supporting roles, only building PCs, the East Coast branch was capable of building about 20 to 31 systems a day, depending on the complexity of the systems being built that day, and that was with its 4 builders. The West Coast, for comparison, from what we understand, was building about 3 to 4 a day, and yet it had significantly more staff. You start to see some of the unraveling here. So our investigation revealed that the company, as of its demise, had about 615 or so builds queued for the East Coast, which is clearable within a month if they had supply available and didn't go bankrupt. And that's based on information we've collected from former employees. And this warehouse was the one that handled the bulk of the orders and had the most refined processes. There were an additional 170 to 180 builds queued at the West Coast warehouse located in Oakland. that's also where more of the streamer and influencer builds were prepped. And here's where the problems start. This was revealed in our investigation. This image shows the company's to-do list for the West Coast warehouse nearing sort of the end months of Artesian. You can see that the West Coast had about 3 builds per day scheduled, including one for a streamer, listed at the bottom. These were the types of builds that Artesian's CEO wanted to personally work on, in what we think becomes a trend of attempts to associate with the concept of internet celebrity. And these were what the West Coast handled. Now, they also handled customer builds, so normal builds that weren't supposed to be special ones. And the way it was supposed to be set up is that the West Coast would handle builds for people closer to California, and the East Coast was supposed to be for handling builds on the East Coast, because it drives down logistics costs and people get stuff faster. That's the way it's supposed to work. So then, back to the image, this is what the West Coast had to do on this particular Wednesday, and this is what the East Coast division had to do on its Wednesday for the same date. It doesn't even fit on the page. So this branch, it printed money for Artesian by all accounts we could collect. The picture being painted here is one of 2 autonomously operating arms of the same company, with little collective or collaborative action being taken between them. In interviewing team members from both locations, we got a strong sense of an East versus West mentality within the same company. And as we spoke with the staff members from the 2 branches,
oh my god, they fucking dropped
you could start to see where some of the division arose. It can be healthy and useful or productive to have a somewhat competitive mindset internally, but it has to be managed well by managers, by people higher up, to ensure that it doesn't devolve into just toxicity and a backstabbing environment. I am certain that some of our viewers who've worked in large corporate environments especially, probably are all too familiar with, where it goes from feeling like you're on a team to starting to feel like you have to watch your back for someone who wants whatever, your job, your window cubicle, whatever it may be. So easy for that to really go off the rails and create a much worse situation than needs to exist. Now, as for why it devolved into a competitive mindset instead of turning into a collaborative one, well, this image explains that
Nickelodeon
well. This is the
inspired
quality
skins.
of build we were told would get delivered between the warehouses. What you're looking at is the PC build for streamer Nick Merckx. It shows how it was initially built and shipped from the West Coast branch, where the CEO directly worked on the build. The West Coast would build the celebrity builds often on stream, and often done by the CEO and maybe one other builder. And then the East Coast would beg the West Coast branch to ship them the builds for a final once-over. In this Nick Merckx build, that's exactly what happened. The East Coast branch handled the final packing and distribution of the system, and when it arrived from the West Coast, the lower-level East Coast employees immediately
Jesus Christ.
in the cabling mess that was delivered for the system. It was going to be one of the largest collaborations with a streamer they'd ever done, so they wanted it to look like it was built well. Artesian's CEO wasn't particularly
Our PCs never looked that bad.
And the crew
Ever.
Anyway, and we're also curious if Nick Merckx knows that Katz referred
Make sure you guys go check out Coffee Bill PC, by the way.
Ransom. As for
Better
why
than Artesian build.
to rework these happened,
go on Artesian's YouTube channel if it's
difference
and just
in the
like
escape rate or the rate of
and all the
RMA
videos.
units or defects that escape one warehouse versus another. We were told that the normal escape rate for the West Coast was approaching 10%, meaning 10% of the product leaving would have some form of defect and either need a replacement, a refund, or to be shipped back for repair. And the East Coast escape rate was less than 1%.
There was even a rumor going around saying that the fucking West Coast facilities would do things to the PCs to make them have to like get the PCs back. Like they would purposely like fuck with the clock rate of the CPU. They would fuck up some of the BIOS. They would fuck up some of like the programs.
You have 2 groups
like they made their PCs perform worse just to make them come back.
Just going over the work that the other one had already immediately completed, and that's where
I feel like what they probably did too, the ones they like had repaired to bring back, they probably used those
earlier. A large portion of the money was being
they did
in a way that isn't necessarily
like so much bullshit.
They're definitely doing that too.
The biggest ongoing liability though was builds awaiting a GPU. Artesian had many outstanding builds, either partially complete, waiting to be even started, or just generally unfulfilled orders. Artesian would collect money for the order, as is normal, and then fulfill it when complete. but it had unknown timelines sometimes for GPUs, and this could lead to short-term liabilities stacking up, as the orders could be canceled at any time, even though the money had been taken and potentially already recommitted to the business. Artesian would regularly send its warehouse team to purchase GPUs at full retail price or even scalped on StockX, just to get the long back-ordered builds out the door before the customer might cancel it. This reduced margin, but it was better than allowing the build time and the build itself to go to waste. So Artesian ended up stuck in a dangerous business cycle that a lot of businesses that go out of business find themselves in, where it was perpetually trying to chase the completion of old orders, which have been long paid for, and that money has probably been spent, so it doesn't feel like they're making money anymore, with selling new orders. So you're chasing old money with new, which starts to sound like something else, and the problem is what we got, which is a collapse. But because Artesian was constantly chasing that new money instead of first fulfilling those already paid for orders due to GPU limitations, it was reallocating inbound GPU supply all the time. This included it being reallocated away, as we understand, from backlogged orders and instead into new promotions. Artesian's leadership would butt heads about allocation to builds versus allocations to acquiring new sales. They would also reallocate supply already for streamer and celebrity builds as the GPUs arrived, rather than necessarily just sending them all to fulfilling orders. So Artesian's other managers would push for the opposite. They would sometimes push for fulfilling the orders instead of chasing new customer acquisition. We have a lot more documentation and evidence we could share of this fascinating story, but this piece is long enough at this point. And at the end of all of this, you're really left with just a few key points. One of those is that Artesian Builds is now gone. It's been through bankruptcy proceedings, and the company has reformed as a new entity, which is something like Artesian Future Technologies. This is a normal bankruptcy procedure where the assets reform into a single asset. And so Artesian Builds itself, as we knew it, is finished.
All right, guys.
All of its assets have
literally, as an ex-Artesian Builds partner,
and the company was run by a man who we think
the fact that like I've never been able to get in contact with these guys during like the whole time this shit was going on, the fact that I still have a PC in the warehouse that I already saw in the fucking auction paperwork, and the fact that I lost so much money from this.
In just its first couple years of
100% wholeheartedly, seriously, sincerely, fuck Artesian Builds. Yeah, make sure you guys go check out Copy Build PC on Twitch. Any PC build that I do, even if I have to build it myself, as far as like finding the parts and getting the parts, it'll look way better. You'll get it super soon. They're live stream builds, and they're done right. Communication is always like a key thing for me. Cleanliness is always a key thing for me, and yeah, just being fast and professional. That's the goal. Yeah, fuck Artesian Builds. I'm still like $2,200 short. I'm still dealing with all these paperworks and documents and court hearings and attorney shit. Yeah, this is coffee. Hope you guys enjoyed the little video. Make sure to go over to Gamers Nexus and like the video, comment on it, say what's up. You know, give them some love. Like, this was just a small reaction video. I have stuff to do today, and I appreciate you guys. Yep.